Hello and welcome. My name is Natalie. I am a third year psychology student, and today I am going to be speaking with you about motivational interviewing. What is motivational interviewing? It is an intervention method used by therapists to strengthen a client's motivation for change. It's a heavily client-centered approach that's widely used in the context of changing health behaviors. It aims to lead the client towards change rather than direct them to it. And it's probably most effective when a client has become aware that a change is necessary, but they might still be seeking the catalyst to increase their level of motivation. This is known in the trans-theoretical model of change as a contemplative stage. Motivational interviewing suggests that we can actually influence a client's level of motivation significantly if we take on the appropriate style of intervention. Throughout this video, we're going to be looking at the spirit of motivational interviewing, counselling techniques that support this spirit, and perhaps most importantly, the fundamental guiding principles of motivational interviewing. So at the very heart of this approach is what we call the spirit of motivational interviewing. And for it to be effective, it's really important that we get this right. A simple way to remember the spirit of motivational interviewing is through the PACE acronym. P is for partnership. There's no power struggle in motivational interviewing. The client-therapist relationship is a collaboration between equals, and it's driven by the patient's agenda. We want the environment to be a really comfortable one where the patient is comfortable discussing change. The client is completely autonomous, and the therapist is really just there as a facilitator. It's the client who determines the need for change. We assume the client knows themselves and their strengths best, and although the therapist can influence the partnership, it's the client who drives the conversation. The A in the PACE acronym is for acceptance. The therapist accepts the client's goals and values, along with any past choices they may have made. It's obviously important that the client does not feel judged and sees the therapist as an ally as they take on challenges, especially in the face of adversity. Just as important to the spirit of motivational interviewing is a demonstration of compassion for the client, which is the C. The final aspect of this spirit acronym is the E for evoke or evocation. Connecting to strong feelings and memories from different times can really help to evoke change. The spirit of motivational interviewing supports these really emotional conversations between the client and the therapist because they're so powerful in changing a client's attitude to maladaptive behaviors. The motivational interviewing approach occurs in two stages. The first stage is the rapport building phase, where the client and the therapist are developing their relationship. In practical terms, the therapist can make sure the spirit of motivational interviewing is alive by ensuring that some routine counselling methods are utilised. These are summarised by the OARS acronym. The O is for open-ended questions. These open-ended questions require more than a yes or no answer and encourage the therapist to understand more about the client's values and what is really driving the potential change. The A in the OARS acronym is for affirmations. This is where the therapist will indicate an understanding of the client. By allowing the client to feel heard, they feel validated. Affirmations are also a really great opportunity to build rapport when you can highlight strengths and achievements around when they have actually been successful in making changes in the past. The R is for reflections. These allow the therapist to rephrase the client's statements to demonstrate you really do understand their story. And finally, the S is for summarizing. And summarizing what the client has told you allows the therapist to ensure understanding and even to point out discrepancies between the current state and their desired goal. For example, a therapist may summarize to their teenage client, so let's make sure I have this right. You're really shy when you're mixing with other people because you're so self-conscious about your skin. Your GP has suggested that your sugar intake and your hygiene might have something to do with it. And even though you know you probably should eat better and cleanse each day, you're finding it hard to change these habits. Is that right? Summarising accurately can not only demonstrate effective listening, but also provide some clarification for the client. The second phase of the motivational interviewing process is around strengthening the client's commitment to change and establishing a plan of action. This is the next phase in the trans-theoretical model, moving from the contemplative stage and towards a preparation stage where the client may even start exercising a little. The therapist promotes this next stage, eliciting change talk by asking questions from 4 categories. The first category is around discussing the disadvantages of the status quo. Here, the client explores the negative implications of their current choices and what the implications might be if there actually is no change. This can be really confronting when those questions are posed in the spirit of motivational interviewing. Conversely, by exploring the advantages of changing behaviours, it's hoped that the client can become excited by the possibilities ahead. Questions such as, can you think of some advantages if you were to take up walking or reduce your alcohol intake? Again, the therapist is allowing the client to delve into their own thoughts and experiences so that any change is more likely to be more meaningful and long-lasting. The therapist can also ask questions around the client's optimism for change, tapping into their knowledge of the client. Questions around character strengths that would allow them to succeed, or asking questions such as, how have you managed to make changes before? These ideally encourage clients to believe they can be hopeful about the future and that they do have the capacity to make these changes. Similarly, the therapist can gauge the client's intention to change by asking questions like, how do you want your life to be in 5 years' time? Or, ideally, what would you like to change? When time is of the essence, a concise way to elicit responses in any of these 4 categories is to use ruler talk. The therapist can ask questions such as, on a scale of 0 to 10, how confident are you that you can reduce your wine intake from 1 bottle a night to 1 bottle every 3 or 4 nights? Why not 0? What would it take to move from a 0 to a 6 or a 7? The discrepancy between these scores becomes the focus of the conversation, and it's from this information that you can formulate a plan with your client. When we're looking at changing some really established, long-standing behaviours, it's not always a flawless process. When faced with challenges, it can be useful to refer to the guiding principles of motivational interviewing. These can be summarised by the RULE acronym. R is for resist the writing reflex. Sometimes it can be really obvious to the therapist what action the client should take, but persuading the client to take a certain path is contradictory to the spirit of motivational interviewing. It's really important that the client maintains his or her autonomy and that the therapist remains non-authoritative so that when there is a change in behaviour, the client can own it. U is for understand patient motivation for change. These are the motivations that will drive any real change, so it's incredibly important that you develop an understanding of these, even if they are completely different to your own. The L is for listen with empathy. A general rule of thumb is to spend at least equal parts listening and talking, but make sure you're actively listening and really seeking to understand your client by asking those questions that evoke emotions and good conversation. The E is for empower your client. We already know that this is at the heart of the motivational interviewing technique, and the evidence suggests that your outcomes improve when clients are involved in making their own plans for change. You need to really tap into their knowledge because they know themselves best, and knowing and understanding their own thoughts, behaviours and motivations are the key to improving motivation to change. Motivational interviewing is a powerful counselling method that can be used to enhance motivation to change in the context of health behaviours. It's proven to be powerful in reducing alcohol and drug use, and there's growing evidence that it's also an effective tool in other areas. It highlights the importance of motivation and ambivalence and is underpinned by the 4 guiding principles: resisting the writing reflex, understanding the patient's motivations, listening with empathy, and empowering the patient. I hope this has given some clarity around how motivational interviewing can be used in the therapeutic context. Thank you for listening.